Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 802. My opponent went e4 here, and I went with d5, the center counter defense. So he continued with taking the normal move, and now I go with this knight f6 line, which I like a little better than the queen takes d5 line, although that is certainly quite playable as well, and actually gives a better advantage, gives black more chances according to the database here. Let's see, a bit more drawish, but white has more winning chances after knight f6. Anyway, in this database. And my opponent on move 3 plays a really rare move. I think the normal move here is d4, and this is a line that's good for white. You can take, and well, white can play with c4 and kick the knight back, and the knight can go back to either b6 or f6. You know, I've been playing knight f6. I don't think there's really anything wrong with this. If you play knight to b6, this is also okay, and it's the main move. You get something that looks sort of like an Alechin's defense. This knight will come out here, and maybe this pawn will go here sometime, maybe after the bishop develops, depending on what white plays. Anyway, should be okay as well, but I always felt like, why not, let's see. So if he goes c4, yeah, why not just put the knight back here? Isn't that the more natural square for the knight? And I've looked at that with the chess engine, and it seems like this is okay. It rates about equal. It's at a certain depth anyway. But in this game, so he didn't play that d4 move. Let's see. The other way after d4, knight takes d5. Knight f3 is really the main move here. And then you can continue with bishop g4. Bring the bishop out, and then moving the e-pawn. Or you can play with g6. And develop this bishop and castle and leave this bishop back behind the pawns for a while. Anyway, both interesting ways to play for black. But he didn't go for d4. He went for bishop to c4. So this is the game. And I just took the pawn. I think looks like in the database people have played bishop g4 here, but there's no harm in grabbing the pawn right away, it looks like. Looks like this is a fine move. And then knight c3 is the normal move, which he plays later, but he kind of wastes a move here with a3. Now, because, let's see, so we're just out of the opening book at this point. Because the Scandinavian defense is not the best defense, especially if you look at it with the chess engine. Even after white has played a move like a3, the chess engine still thinks that white is better here. So that's probably true, but it's a position that black can play in any case. Let's see, he goes knight to f3 here. I go bishop g7, and he goes knight to c3. I just wanted to point out that these little missteps, like a3, I think is maybe a slight misstep or a wasted move, but it has not given away the edge. There's still some kind of edge for white in these positions, probably because there's a little more space for white. And I think white's development is pretty easy here. But white should play the move d4 here. Why not just open up the center and castle? And white would be doing well. Knight c3, still okay. But this introduces some tactics. And I didn't take advantage of these tactics. But anyway, keep your eye out. Right here, I played c6. I think c6 is an okay move. The chess engine would play this way, but this is a very dry kind of way to play it. It thinks that things are about even, so it thinks that black can equalize with this kind of play. Knight takes c3, d takes c3, queen takes d1, king takes d1, and knight to c6, and maybe even a slight edge to black, not much. But anyway, it's not that much of a, it's not that fun of a position to play. The queens are off, the center is open. Both sides have the bishop pair. White has maybe a weakness because of this doubled pawn that gives black an extra center pawn, so that's an edge. I mean, black certainly has something to play for in this position, but, well, I just enjoy the game more if I keep the queens on, so I don't mind playing a move like c6, even if it's not technically the best move. And let's see, and he goes d3, and I just castle here. So right now there is this tactic, although it's not quite as strong as you might think. But if you want to think about this tactic for a little bit, it's kind of interesting. You can pause the video and see if you can figure out the tactic. Okay, give the answer away now. It is knight takes c3. And, well, he has to take back. And then you take here with check. So it looks like you're just winning the exchange and a pawn here. But, well, it's not so simple. So bishop d2 to meet the check. And then after bishop takes, queen takes, hitting the rook in the corner. So you have to do something about that. And if you castle, then bishop to h6, threatening mate, actually wins the rook back. You have to block this diagonal somehow, probably with f6. So the chess engine says after queen takes a1, you should play f6 immediately. And it actually thinks that this position is pretty close to even. So looks like white has sacked the exchange and got a lot of piece activity. White still has the bishop pair. Let's see, what's the pawn count? White's down a pawn as well as being down the exchange, but, well, I guess there's no development for black. Maybe that's the key point. So it's a bit dangerous to play that tactic right now, and so castling is actually a good move here. Let's see, he goes bishop g5, and I went bishop to g4, pinning his knight, and now after h3, now there is actually a this is actually a winning position for black, which is kind of funny because h3 looks like a pretty natural move. When I put the bishop out here and I have this pawn triangle, then I'm committed to either retreating or trading that bishop. So this is a way for white to grab the bishop pair, and so that's a pretty reasonable thing to do, playing that h3 move and grabbing the bishop pair. But white hasn't castled yet. And we'll see some problems after bishop takes f3. So he played h3, and I took. And now if he takes back with the queen, now this tactic suddenly is working. Because, well, for one thing, the queen is not on the back rank, so the queen is not getting on this diagonal with the recapture. This is all happening without any defense on the back rank. After the check, the king is going to have to move. Yeah, probably has to come forward to e2 to protect the rook in the corner so that he only loses the exchange. So anyway, this is a winning position for black. So he didn't play queen takes f3, he played g takes f3. And even here, this tactic is winning, although it's not as clear as in the other case. So for example, knight takes c3, pawn takes, bishop takes check. The king has to move. The king can go to f1 now, because the queen is protecting the rook. And we get, once again, we get the queen on this diagonal. But the difference between this and the previous position, oh yeah, my turn, I get to develop a piece. He can go bishop h6 and threaten checkmate once again. And, oh, knight to f6 is another way to play this. And then he can take here. And then cancel that. Okay. And so things have settled down here. And white got the exchange back, and so white is just down a pawn. So I won that pawn on c3. But there's a couple other things I have going for me. I mean, white has the bishop versus knight, which maybe is useful in the endgame, but white's pawn structure is also a disaster, and his rook is going to take a couple moves to get into the game, and his king might not be very safe over here with those muddled pawns. So actually this is still quite a good position for black. So in this position, I really should have gone for the tactic anyway, even though it doesn't actually win the exchange. It wins the pawn, and it leaves white with these messed up pawns on the king side. So that would be good. I just retreated the knight here back to f6. And I have some edge, but this is probably a game that is still within the bounds of about even. Let's see, so he went queen d2 here. And I went knight bd7, bring my pieces out. And now he went bishop to h6. And once again, this is not the best move. What he should do, and the way to keep it in a reasonable shape here, is just castle queenside. I mean, that's where he really got into trouble in this game, is his failure to castle. But if he had just castled queenside right at this moment, I mean, if you think about this position, Both sides have all their pieces out, and I'm safely castled, and his structure is a mess over here on the king side, so he definitely wants to castle queen side. Yeah, why not castle here and bring those rooks into the game? It's just the most logical move here, as well as being the best one by the chess engine standard as well. So anyway, he just was pursuing this plan of lining up the queen and the bishop and trading off that my dark squared bishop, but it wasn't really going anywhere, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I could have probably, if he castled. Let's think about this a little bit. If he castled here, I could play a move like rook to e1, and if he played the bishop here, I could retreat my bishop if I really wanted to hang on to it. But and I probably would have just let him trade it off anyway. I don't think I would have gone to that much trouble. There's probably better moves I have in that position. So anyway, he played bishop h6, and so he's losing again after this. So he was losing after h3, and I didn't find the best continuation. But now after bishop h6, he is losing once again. And I find the best move here, which is knight to e5. And yeah, it's just a really strong move. This is threatening this light squared bishop, which is one of his better pieces. It's also hitting this undefended pawn on f3 and threatening the fork of the king and the queen. So a move that doesn't give him any time to take my bishop. He doesn't really have the time for that. What's his best defense here? Probably just castling once again is his best defense. That defends the queen so that, well, the queen was defended anyway. I guess defending the queen is not the key point. Mainly it's getting the king away from this check, bringing a rook into the game, and just sacking this pawn. But there are, in compensation for the pawn sack, and then the queen goes to e3, the queen has to stay in touch with the bishop, but as long as that can happen, he's okay here. So he's got, let's count the pawns. It's 4 and 3, and he's got 4 and 2. Yeah, so it's just a 1 pawn difference here. And because of that pawn that he's sacrificed, as it were, he's got open lines for his pieces. So although black is better, I mean, this is still a game, I would say, and certainly something that white should continue to play on, look for mistakes. The other thing I was mentioning during the game, he should just move his queen. He could also, in this position, play queen e3 directly, and that defends this pawn for the moment, continues to hold on to the bishop, and I'll probably take this bishop off and mess up his pawns over on this side, but this is also a position that's playable for white. Black is better, but maybe it's not a complete win. Anyway, so knight e5 was a good move, and king e2 was another mistake. So I went and took on c4, and I was actually miscalculating something. I was saying if he takes my knight, I will take his queen, and then when he takes back, I'll take the bishop. But of course, the bishop defends the queen. So when he takes my knight, if I take the queen, he will just take back with the bishop. So that's not best. So that's what he should do. He should actually just take the knight, and then my best is to take the bishop at this point, and then bring my queen out. Taking the bishop is really just a way of distracting his queen and pulling it offside. And you may not think that the queen over here on h6 around my king side is an offside piece, but in fact he doesn't have any follow-through without the bishop or the knight nearby. Even the rook going to the g file is not that threatening. Yeah, seems like I can just hold on to things here with no problem. I can move the knight and bring the queen back to this square too, if things get tricky over there on the king side. Anyway, so this is a good position for white, for black as well, although white can play on. So it's really so he made a couple of moves that were put him in a worse position, but this is the final losing move. Bishop takes g7. There's just no way this is working because his queen is hanging. He needed to deal with that first. And so we can just go forward some moves from here. Let's say he just keeps taking stuff, but he just doesn't get enough. And when the dust settles, I've got a queen for a rook. The funny thing is, it's surprisingly hard to finish the game off at this point. I'll show a couple of spots where I could have finished off quicker, but in general from here, well, it's true that from here to the end of the game, I just have a completely winning advantage. It's just that it takes time. And, one of the problems is that I have 3 pieces and White has 3 pieces, and his pieces are pretty mobile. So there's no way that I can win by just, say, ganging up on a pawn. And, when you have extra material, sometimes you can win just by piling your pieces up on a single point. But it won't work because as long as White's pieces are well coordinated, I can't break through in that way. So you somehow have to make use of the greater maneuverability of the queen. That's its advantage over the rooks, and its ability to coordinate with the knight. But it takes a while to set that up. So although the win is never in doubt somehow, it still seemed to take a long time. So we get some fairly normal moves here as I try to activate my pieces and get them working together. I could have grabbed the pawn on f2. I think in this position right here, a chess engine would like me to grab that pawn, which has been hanging for a while, and then just retreat the queen. But that really did not change things much because that pawn is not going anywhere. So, I'm not sure that was such a great idea. Anyway, he manages to open a line up against my king. Well, it's not against the king exactly, but it's on the h-file near the king. And I'm trying to weaken the pawn structure around his king. That's why I was pushing those pawns forward. So all this is okay, and still keeping that winning edge the whole way. And we're coming up on a point. Yeah, right here. I was concerned about various tactics. In fact, I think when I moved the queen, yeah, some moves earlier I moved the queen. There was an idea here of rook takes knight, pawn takes, and then maybe some way that White has of taking advantage of a discovered check. So if my queen were on a dark square here or here, then that knight check or over here could pick up the queen. So I just moved my king to the side to get away from those tactics. The chess engine gives this line at this point. So this is one way I could have finished the game off quicker. Queen to d2. So that's making sense, targeting the b2 pawn, or threatening to, allowing rook takes h5, not taking back immediately. This is kind of a nice touch, playing rook b6 first, threatening mate. And to deal with the mate, he has to bring this rook back. And so then there's no longer a discovered check along this file, and then I can take the rook. So that's a nice little tactical sequence there. So starting with queen d2 to initially build some pressure on b2, and then allowing him to take the knight, but not taking back right away, but threatening mate on b2 with the rook move, forcing him to bring his rook back, and then taking this rook back over here. And that leaves me with a nice edge there. Anyway, so the way I played was just to simply get away from that discovered attack. But then he starts kind of harassing my pieces. So I had the same idea: put the rook here and gang up on that b2 pawn. But I have to suffer through some checks first. And so he chases me around. But there's nothing fatal here. There's not even a perpetual. Here's another place. I eventually end up going back to the king side here, but I first tried to run over to the queen side before getting chased back. But I could have gone directly to the f6 square, and he can't play rook f7 because his knight is hanging at this point. So that's the point of playing it here. And chess engine gives this line knight f7. And then I could play knight d3. This is the configuration I got in the game that eventually led to the win. If I have the queen, the knight, and the rook all ganging up on the b2 pawn, and he can't defend it just because his pieces have gotten distracted in their attempts to harass my king over here. So that would lead to a win that's a little quicker than the game. Let's see. So I went king d6 first, and he checked me with the knight. And then I just started running back here. Went knight d8 check, back to f6, rook f7 check, king here, rook here check. So a lot of checks. But I saw at the end that I would be able to block it all. And now if he checks this way, probably this is the most stubborn way to play it. It does, once again, pull my knight away. But then his rook has to come back. Let's see. And then, let's see, queen to d2. Hitting the knight. Knight takes b7 to get away from that. And queen d5 with a fork. And this eventually will win some more material and lead to a win as well. So that would be maybe the most stubborn defense. He just went back to b1 immediately, and now my knight comes in. And, well, he throws in a few more checks, but this doesn't help. Now I can walk away to f4 here where there's no more checks, and so he resigned. If he were to bring the rook back, yeah, then I can just take with the rook there, and I'm threatening mate, and if he takes, then he gets mated with the queen. Otherwise, he gets mated with the rook. So anyway, that was no way of avoiding the mate at this point. So interesting game, and I hope you guys like this, and I will see you again soon. Bye.